Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session that we've entitled Power Project Management to the Enterprise Client. I hope that you're all having a fantastic Relativity Fest so far. And what we're going to do is we're going to obviously start with introducing ourselves. I'm sure most of us have the Relativity app, but if not, there's another plug to get it. So I am David Herman. I'm a senior project manager at D4 Special Console. I actually started kind of in a background with forensics, so I did that for about 9 years, forensic collection in New York City and around the world. I've been doing, what we consider to be turnkey, full life cycle project management, enterprise project management for about 15 years. And then we have some fun facts about ourselves. Mine is that I am a master scuba diving instructor, and I've been doing that longer than eDiscovery. And the running joke there is that you cannot do currently eDiscovery underwater. So that's the greatest thing. You cannot access Relativity underwater. So that's a huge plus. To my right, we have Stephen Smith. And Stephen, why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm Stephen Smith. I'm an experienced data analyst. I started at D4 as a litigation support analyst. And now I've moved on to a position where I'm actually sort of training project managers, giving them that experience that I've had as a litigation support analyst. And my fact is I'm a national Mahjong champion.
Mahjong, so awesome.
I'm Brendan Bates. I've been in the industry for 8 years. I started out as a document reviewer. I'm currently, in my current role, I leverage custom scripting and custom objects to create new solutions. And I am a certified Relativity master.
Great. And then Mike, I know you have some experience with obviously contract attorneys, which is what Brendan used to be. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Mike Ryan. I am a director at Special Counsel. I manage a group of about 30 to 35 permanent managing attorneys and also the temporary managing attorneys. I typically handle most of the larger, more complex cases, and my fun fact is I played football in college.
So we will take questions afterwards on anything about, enterprise project management, as well as scuba diving, Mahjong, being a Relativity master, and of course, playing NCAA football. So moving on, what we wanted to do today is kind of give you a framework, some definitions for really what we're talking about here, because it can be a little bit ambiguous. So we kind of sat down as a group, a few months back when we were designing this PowerPoint deck, and we thought to ourselves, let's define Power Project Management, what it is, at least in our opinion, this group of some 30 years of experience in the industry, and then obviously the enterprise client as well. So what we came up with is flawless execution of all project tasks in a comprehensive and agile manner. And I remember very specifically right away, Brendan, who is very analytical, came back and said, what are you talking about, flawless execution? This is a very messy business that we're in. And that is absolutely true. So that would be our perfect definition, if there was one, of Power Project Management. But obviously, we are in a messy business. eDiscovery is a messy business. Things happen all the time. There's challenges that arise. So it's really your ability as a Power Project Manager to overcome some of those challenges. So we'll present some information around that today. But we'll also give you some really, what I believe to be some really concrete technical solutions, and that's where Brendan and Stephen in particular will shine. And then your enterprise client, our definition, it's a moving target of sorts, but always implies a company's largest and most complex high revenue customers. So for some of us, maybe if you're at a smaller vendor or a smaller law firm, that could be just a single big business that you're servicing, or a single Fortune 500 client, or a single government agency. For the larger vendors, D4 Special Counsel, fairly large. We have many entire law firms that we're servicing. We have many big Fortune 500 companies that we're servicing. So that's kind of the framework for what we're talking about today, servicing of the largest and probably most demanding clients that your enterprise may have. Our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about scoping and team building. Then we're going to dive into data maps and preservation. And not at a very high level for any of these. We're going to give you some, really what we believe to be concrete information. And then Brendan and Stephen will really add some very good information around enterprise workspace management as well as enterprise review strategies. So should be very interesting information today. And my deck went away. There it is. So scoping and team building, developing a scoping timetable and adhering to it. Obviously, we've all, I assume in this room, worked projects before, probably very large projects before. You know, trying to scope those out, trying to find the exact pieces of the puzzle and how it'll all come together is super important, as well as the timetable that you're going to adhere to. Mike, what are some of your thoughts? You know, Mike has managed some of the largest reviews that we've done, you know, nationwide. What are your thoughts on, you know, that timetable and that scoping process?
Yeah, for a lot of these larger cases, it's not the same as the sort of the traditional document review where you have a deadline and you have a certain amount of documents. We often refer to these as like octopus cases because they grow in several different directions, different jurisdictions, different RFPs, different custodians. They just kind of take on a life of their own. So it's always important when you're scoping it to think big picture, think sort of where is this heading, and then kind of revisit that scoping decision and those discussions. And it's almost more of a process than a firm timetable as it would be in the traditional document review. Yeah, like David said, one of the big things is when you do finally have a schedule, is finding a way to stick to it. That even includes like we produce on Tuesdays, we do this on Wednesdays. It's the only way to sort of keep something of that size moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Our second point up here is management of multiple law firms and multiple case teams. And at least in my situation, you know, I have one really gigantic project. We have, you know, hundreds of millions of records in review, multiple terabytes that we've now processed, and it's just around the clock type situation. We're constantly working on it, and we definitely have multiple law firms involved. In fact, they're very big, very well-known law firms, and with those law firms, you obviously have case teams, and they have very important people with very distinct personalities. So when we talk about the management of multiple law firms, that's always something that should be in the back of your mind. But what I try to do, and I think that what Mike tries to do, is we try to find from those case teams on the legal side, the litigation support side, and even the corporate clients, if their legal people are involved, is we try to find the best skill sets from those people and really utilize those. One, for example, is a very prominent litigation support project manager at one of the firms I'm working with. She more or less handles most of the entire production process as far as getting those out the door. So she's ultimately accountable for that project process. It's not like certain law firms are sending out productions here and there willy-nilly. It's one person, it's streamlined. She has a lot of expertise in this, and so we rely on her and we count on her to be that key person when we have this multiple law firm situation. Mike, any thought on multiple case teams? Because I know that you'll see that a lot in the work that you do as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes with sort of the octopus nature of these cases that you're sort of juggling two groups of people that don't always have the same exact objectives or the same timetable. And you sort of have to, especially if you're brought in by the end clients, you're not brought in by one of the particular law firms, you have to sort of juggle both. I mean, both sides will want you to do what they, like their stuff is high priority and the other firms isn't. So it's a lot of kind of juggling egos and juggling the politics that happen with multiple law firms involved in the same case.
Thank you. Our next point up here is database pre-case consulting and then custodian management. The pre-case consulting thing used to be something maybe that was more traditionally done on the vendor side. And what Mike was saying is that nowadays that's really changed a lot, and that obviously he and his teammates are all attorneys with JDs. So tell us a little bit about how you guys are getting involved ever earlier in these case life cycles.
Yeah, on some of these cases now we're being brought in before there's even search terms, before there's custodians, they just know it's going to get big. And so they bring in typically it's just me, or it's just me and a small group of either reviewers, or we have staff attorneys on. And we sort of start at try to find the hottest document there is and work our way out. Try to figure out who's who knew what departments are involved, if it's a corporate client. And then we start to try to look for potential search terms. And we're doing a lot of the stuff that the case teams often did. Part of it too is to add data for the case teams when they go and they might have a disagreement with the other side about potential search terms. They actually have, we've done a lot of sampling, we've done a lot of review even, and they can go there and say, hey, this term is over-inclusive, or this term isn't going to yield anything but NR stuff. And so we're doing a lot of that. And it's also like we're able to sort of set the framework of building a cast of characters, and it's more robust than a typical project where you might not even have all the pieces connected till you're halfway through.
Thank you. Yeah. And then the other point on that was the custodian management piece. A lot of times you'll just see custodians in a very large enterprise review just organized by, custodian last, custodian first. But in reality, what we're finding, particularly if you're involved in investigations, is really, and Brendan has a lot of expertise in this, let's add as much information as possible about those custodians early on. What role were they in? What was their title? What was their location? What job did they have? Did they change jobs during the time frame of the case? Let's add as much of that concrete information that we can from the corporate client or from the case team in early on, and that can be extremely helpful rather than just looking at somebody's name. The fourth point up here is to build a who's who for roles and responsibilities. And that's something that we do at D4 Special Counsel for these very large cases. And that to me is very fundamental. That kind of goes hand in hand with the management of multiple law firms, in that you often have, maybe in my case, we probably have some 100 people from the two law firms and the corporate client at least. And that's not including the teams of contract attorneys or managing attorneys as they're called now. So we actually build a who's who. We actually have the LinkedIn profile or the picture from the law firm site, and then we'll add notes into what are those people involved in the case? What is their specialty? What have the partners litigated before that's similar to this, so that we can actually have that who's who. And that doesn't just benefit us on the vendor side, it actually can benefit the litigation support people that are involved. It can actually be incredibly beneficial if somebody leaves the case, which happens. Project managers, we always talk about getting hit by a bus, but project managers do move on. People in litigation support at law firms move on. Attorneys move on in various roles. So that's the who's who. And then the last point here is that vendor skills need to be very diverse. Brendan's a good example of that. I don't think that early on he thought that he would be doing as all this complex scripting and custom scripts and relativity, but he's really becoming an expert in that, or is an expert in that. The biggest example I have for my large case that we're doing now is that we actually have a full-time DBA, and this gentleman's responsibility is with the property security credentials. He actually goes out to our corporate client. He can take a myriad of data from a myriad of different systems located at the corporate client, big databases, and then he'll bring that data across, obviously again with the property security permissions, and then he'll organize that data into usable reports and formats that basically are effectively used in the litigation. Tableau workbooks, big giant Excel files, running text files and stuff like that. So having a person and thinking kind of at the early onset of your enterprise case, who am I going to need, or at least have him or her on standby and have them available is pretty critical. And one of those skill sets that we definitely use, again, is that DBA. Really quickly, we're going to, before we kind of get into Stephen and Brendan's area of expertise, we're going to talk just about data maps and their need to be living. Mike kind of touched on this a bit ago with his octopus, saying that these things can basically just go in all kinds of different directions. So it's absolutely true that your data maps, your collections, logs need to be living. You need to constantly be going back. Did the time frame change? Did this custodian basically have, another role prior? Did this organization come from several other organizations that via M&A, basically now we have this other company that's coming into scope that we didn't even think we had at the onset of the investigation or the litigation, and now they're in scope, and maybe their systems are very different. The second point up there is the security component. Obviously, I think probably maybe a quarter of the presentations here at RELFest are about various aspects of security and how important security is. Security was a key function that they talked about in the kickoff yesterday for RELFest and how important security is to the underlying core of Relativity. It's obviously also very true when you're managing these big enterprise clients, because if you think about it, we're a portal, the vendor that is, into the corporate client's infrastructure. If we're given access, we have the potential to actually be a gateway into that company for people that are maybe intending to do illicit things. So security obviously is fundamentally important. I know Stephen has a client that's Fortune 100 that he works with on a weekly basis. They don't mess around with their data. It's basically they export it, they put it on encrypted drives, it comes to us, and it's very, very meticulous. We have cases obviously like where the DBA is going in. He's obviously collecting securely collecting information, but he's actually only in a portion of their quote-unquote cloud or their network. They're just pushing out certain data that he can access. And then really as soon as he collects that data, this is again a forensics professional, they eliminate his access. So I think he spends probably more time trying to get access to the company and trying to get the proper permissions in place than he does sometimes doing some of the actual collections. So keep security, if it's not already, in the forefront of your mind. And then it probably needs to go without saying, but accurate and accessible documentation. Mike, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that that is almost a key part of your job, but a huge percentage of your job as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of my larger cases, I can spend up to 10% of my time a week just documenting what we're doing, what we've done, making like decision logs, workflow logs, even mass edit logs and that sort of thing that we put on a shared drive so everyone has access to it, and all the case teams and sometimes even the end client sort of has to sign off on every decision so we don't have a situation 4 months later that said, why are we doing it like this? That sort of thing. And it's these big cases, a small decision can have a tremendous impact. So almost everything gets logged, and it's pretty time consuming, but it's absolutely necessary for what we do.
Right. And another thing that you can do if you have the infrastructure to do it, at least I do it for one of my gigantic cases, is that we have a custom SharePoint portal site that we've built. The client has access to this. Obviously, it's hosted by the vendor side. And that SharePoint portal has everything going all the way back to the early scoping documents, chain of custody documents, collections. We can add processing reports, custom filter reports, all the way through the production process, search term reports, etc. So if you think about it, that can be basically a library, if you will, a virtual library of really all of the case documentation. And again, that really helps you with, again, these multiple case teams. A lot of people might be changing out various roles, but they can all come in and get that same historical information, again, from a SharePoint portal. So that's something to think about as well. Now we're going to get a little bit into the enterprise workspace management. And again, we're thinking about, these big clients, how can we help them better manage, these giant cases in Relativity. We're going to touch on real-time CPU utilization reporting, fixed length text usage, user and group management scripting, and then a pre-review analysis script. So some pretty heady stuff there, but I think that you'll find it very valuable. So Stephen, if you don't mind, why don't you tell us about real-time CPU utilization reporting?
Sure. So sometimes you get a case that, one of these octopus cases like Mike mentioned, that ends up being so big that it warrants having its own SQL server dedicated to it so that you can kind of keep performance issues under wraps. So the back end is always being monitored by IT. They can see these reports, they can pull this information, but what's unique about having one single database with its own dedicated server is that CPU utilization reporting will be specific to that case. And as a result, we're able to generate reports and have them distributed to the litigation support team, even the project management team, and they can see spikes of activity and kind of catch them before they become a serious issue. In fact, we've begun working on resolving latency issues even before the client notices that it's causing an issue in performance of the database and slowing down the review.
Right. And we've seen it lots of times where something will happen. It might just be somebody running an errand search and the CPU will spike up, and Brendan can go out pretty quickly and quash that search, get it out of what's being, utilizing the CPU, and then we can bring the case back to a more normalized way. Stephen, as well, why don't you tell us a little bit about fixed length text field usage? It's a mouthful, but it's good stuff.
So yeah, usage of fixed length text fields, this is another thing that can really bog down a workspace if you're not careful with it. There is a limit to how many fixed length text fields you can create on the document object before you really start seeing a severe impact on the workspace's performance. So it's really easy to hit that limit when you have one of these huge cases. Maybe something where you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions and you have several productions with different Bates prefixes for each jurisdiction, or priv logs, different Bates prefixes for each priv log. So by leveraging custom objects, you can get all of those fixed length fields off of the document table and put them into this custom object. A great example, again, priv log, Bates prefixes. You could have as many fields as you wanted on this custom object for every single jurisdiction, and that stuff is never touching the document object and slowing down other parts of your review.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you guys know, with these big cases, you can have hundreds of different production prefixes, jurisdictions, etc. User and group management scripting. Brendan, why don't you tell us a little bit about this and how advantageous it can be, again, for these big enterprise clients that you're trying to manage?
Sure. So I came up with this solution in order to help manage users and groups better. You run this script and it populates two custom objects, a user custom object and a group custom object. And then it creates a view where you can easily see all of your users in one list, all of your groups in that same list, and how they correlate. And you can tag your different organizations. So if you've got 30 groups, 5 major law firms and 100 people, you can see all of that information in a glance rather than having to click into each group to see which group people are in. So if you need to edit the permissions for one law firm and hit all of the groups that contain that law firm's members, then you can quickly see which groups need to be updated.
Right, right. A much more powerful way to do it than just drilling into each individual group. Something else that Brendan's been working on for some time that we really use at the onset of almost every case is this pre-review analysis script. So Brendan, if you want to explain this, that would be appreciated. And then Mike, I know you had some color that you wanted to add to the end of what he was going to say.
Sure. So we had a lot of great solutions to fix data problems with data sets. But probably one of the biggest issues is diagnosing when those problems exist in your database. So this is a script that you can run at the onset of review that will comb through the database, and it'll highlight all of the potential pitfalls and data issues that you might have. So it's going to look for issues like archived email. It's going to look for instances where you have large populations of email that didn't deduplicate out during processing. It's going to look for issues with journaling email, OCR, and just highlight all of those different issues so that then you know what kind of issues you have in your database, and you can look to your other solutions to fix those problems, start getting your arms around those issues.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And then on our end, it just helps us to, a lot of times, if these issues come up midstream, they can just be extremely problematic, where we, on these large cases, you usually have enormous review teams, a couple hundred people, whereas if there's like a journaling issue, or not journaling, like an archived email issue where there's like stubs coming up, I mean, they can review thousands and thousands before a reviewer properly flags it to you, and you can run it up, and then you have to go to the client and say, hey, we have to re-review thousands of records, and obviously no clients like to hear the word re-review, but so this helps us sort of get ahead of these issues that just come up if you have enough data.
Right. So it's just that whole idea of avoiding to the extent possible, what is preventable. So scripts like these can be really invaluable for your clients. Our third segment here, our last segment, is going to be on the enterprise review strategies. Ability to find junk fast, and not just by looking at file extensions. Near duplicate detection for email, which Brendan kind of touched on more lightly just a minute ago, but a deeper dive into that. Use of the and any for custom STR scripts. That's huge if you have the clients that give you reports that have 90,000 search terms. Relativity doesn't like that. You got to find a better way to do it. Included email script. That's incredibly powerful to kind of cut through unnecessary email review when you have threads going. And then the last one is the Bates range finder script, which is pretty slick. Again, particularly at trial time is the example that we're going to be using. So finding junk fast. Stephen, I think you are on this one.
Yeah, so like David mentioned, one of the traditional methods of finding what we call junk data is to sort of take a look at all the file extensions and whatever you have processed and sort of filter out some of those weird things, the stuff that is either not going to be responsive or just irrelevant in general. However, when we're tasked with identifying like junk attachments, like email signatures and little signature blocks, things like logos, we found it's very helpful to identify anytime you have a large number of duplicate hashes for those attachments. So we've developed a script that runs through, finds any hash that appears more than 30 times, tags an instance of each unique hash, and then you can use that tag to throw those documents into a search. You can either review them separately, tag them all NR, propagate the coding out to the families that they belong to. Basically, just save a lot of time with your review.
Absolutely, and it's important, that last point there, that all of the junk does get eyes on it for confirmation. It's not like we're just using a back-end algorithm to just exclude files or something like that. So it's a very defensible way of doing this. Again, not looking at the file extensions, let's look at the hash, and let's use a script to do it in a more systematic way. Brendan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the near duplicate detection for email and really how you've developed that historically and how powerful that can be, especially in these very large enterprise reviews.
Sure. So this solution was created to solve a problem that we were finding quite frequently in data sets, which is that emails were not deduplicating out during processing. And the reason for that could be different versions of Outlook. It could be Outlook servers adding text to email from values. For example, if I send an email to Stephen and it hits the Outlook server, the Exchange server could be set up to add a string of text like sent on behalf of Brendan Bates, so that the email collected from his inbox doesn't dedupe against the email that I sent. So this solution looks at the email. It looks at the internet message ID, email BCC, number of attachments, recipient count, date, and email subject fields, and matches up documents so that you can find where those near duplicate emails are. And it's going to create a relational field so that you can review one copy, propagate coding, and just start getting your arms around that situation. And then you can also bake into that same script, you can look for archived email, where you might have, so if you've collected archived email, it may be missing attachments, or the text of the email could be truncated. So it's useful to know where you have instances of that, and then match up that truncated or that email missing the attachments back to the full email, so that you're not producing an email without its attachments or just part of its text.
Absolutely, and I think that probably most of us in this room have seen these very large cases, very email intensive cases where a journaling system is coming into play, an enterprise vault type system, and it definitely stores the data differently. It's not the same as a traditional Exchange server would store it. So comparing the two and being able to detect those is really critical so that you're not, making accidents in review.
We've seen that as high as 10 to 15% of a review universe, depending on the organization, up to over 1 million email in a data set could be.
Right. So it could just be a huge amount of the population. Brendan, you were going to also touch on our custom STR Scripts process and the use of the N-Any and how valuable that can be as well.
Sure. So this solution was created when you've got very complex sets of search terms that need to be run. For example, you might have maybe 700 different search terms, and some of them need to run across a specific date filtered universe with one date filter, and another set need to be run across a different date filter. And sometimes you might have up to 17 different STRs that you're running. But what the client wants to see at the end of that is a single comprehensive report featuring each term on one line in one report. So with this solution, what we're doing is we're creating aliases for all of the search terms using the and/any operator. And then we've got 2 scripts that we can run. The first script will take the aliased search terms, dump the alias out into a multiple choice field. And then the second script, you can run across that multiple choice field, and it'll output a hit report that looks like that standard relativity hit report, but it'll be across all 17 of the different STRs that you ran. Or another instance where this becomes useful is when maybe you have search terms that are much longer than 450 characters. Maybe they're 900 characters, and you need to parse them out. And sometimes when you parse those out, they end up getting parsed out into we've had them parsed out into 90,000 different search terms running one STR. Well, what the client is really looking for is a comprehensible report. They don't want to see a report of the 90,000 search terms. They want to see their original 40. So you can alias all of those search terms, dump it out in your multiple choice test, run your script, and you've got that report limited to the 40 terms.
Absolutely. So it's very powerful, especially if you have those search term intensive cases. The included email script, Brendan, you're going to speak to this one as well.
So this solution is most useful when you've run an inclusive only review and you get to the point where you've identified all of your privileged email. So the inclusive only is typically the last email in the thread. So that's what you've reviewed all the inclusives, and you've got the privilege. You run this script over the privilege universe, and it's going to comb through each thread and select only those documents which you would actually need to review in order to verify that you're not missing a responsive but unprivileged document earlier in the thread that's a non-inclusive. So what it's going to cut out is it's going to cut out all of the unrelated branches not related to the email that you selected as privileged, and it's going to remove any of the duplicate spares. So in the test cases where we ran this for that supplementary privilege review where maybe the client was originally, they would just include the entire thread group and review that. When they run this script, it culls about 50% of what they would have otherwise reviewed, just including the entire thread.
Right. And a 50% reduction, right, Mike, it's huge, just less eyeballs touching documents. And our last slide up here, our last tip for enterprise review is Bates Range Finder script. And Stephen is going to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, we'll often get requests to find ranges of baits. You just get this email with 20, 30 different ranges of baits in there. And it can be extremely tedious to go through and make a search, this control ID is greater than that, and try and find those ranges that way. So we have a script that acts off of a field that you basically add all of your Bates ranges as choices to this field, Then you run the script. It finds all of the documents associated with those ranges. And then you can, it basically tags whichever range is associated with those documents. You can go into a search, just say anywhere that field is set, and it pulls in all of those records quick as anything. Saves potentially hours of time. And then I think we've even expanded the functionality of this to trial exhibits.
Right, so we've recently updated this one so that you can, when you get a list of maybe 4,000 or 5,000 trial exhibits from the other side along with accompanying metadata, you can just load those metadata and those ranges into a custom object, run the script. It'll link up the metadata, the trial exhibit metadata to the documents. And it's just a very quick solution of finding those, especially when you're getting multiple trial exhibit lists, maybe one replacing the other. You've got your object, so you just overlay it like you would the document object.
Absolutely. So, we're done with our presentation. We wanted to leave, ample time for questions, and if you have them, we have a microphone up here, and we'll try to repeat the questions, but we would welcome any questions on any of the stuff. Yes, sir. Let's just get the microphone just because it's a little soft. Thank you.
Okay, how's this?
Much better.
All right, you guys mentioned dedicating a server for a case.
Mm-hmm.
But at which point do you do that? Do you wait until the case hits, 30 million, 40 million documents, or do you wait for clients to complain that the case needs a dedicated server? And do you make that virtual, physical? Like what prompted you to do that for that?
Yeah, in the case that we're talking about where this was initially developed, it unfortunately came when the client said, hey, we're definitely having some latency issues, and it became a repeated thing. So in this, particularly large case that I work on a daily basis, this was before we took it to DataGrid, and this is before we moved to, some of the solutions that we have up here, where we're moving a lot of those fixed length text fields over to other objects. But obviously this is an on-prem solution, but I think for any, large enterprise level client that you have that's looking for that autonomy, that ability to basically monitor their systems or their quote unquote slice of relativity in real time, this is really invaluable. And the cost is next to none. I mean, this is a solution that's basically the servers are pinging us. So it's not like once IT sets this up, and as long as they continue to come our way, assuming the SMS or the messaging is working for it, it's a very easy solution. So unfortunately for us, it was set up in hindsight, but there's no reason that if you have just based on experience, if you have a very large client with a very large case where the corpus of data that's going to grow, giving them a dedicated portion of the IT infrastructure just makes a lot of sense. Other thoughts on that? Other side? No?
Did you have to scale the server after that? Even after you moved it, did you have to scale up in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just continues to grow. So they had to keep adding more and more to that particular piece of the infrastructure. Now, I think that there is some limitations still. Like, for example, analytics is still a common resource across the on-prem relativity infrastructure, and then email threading. So there's certain things that you can't make completely autonomous to your giant case or to your enterprise level case. But more or less, yeah, we just continued to add the horsepower where it was needed, whether it be agents or whether it be physical machines to basically power it. I can't answer all the specific technical questions
Right.
on what was done behind the scenes, but we can definitely follow up with you on that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We have to have one more question. I mean, I know it's nearly lunch, but yes, sir. Yeah. Just 1 second.
I guess my question is basically more on the project management part of things. For large cases, how many large cases does the project manager handle? Is there a certain number that you kind of keep within somebody's boundary? Is there
It just comes down to how much should the person sleep or not, really, 'cause it's like, no, to be completely candid, like for my gigantic case, this is pretty much my sole case, but we have, I think some 60 terabytes of data that's hosted in, I think, 6 different Relativity workspaces, all for various things. We have a full-time project manager, a full-time analyst that's dedicated to the project, multiple backup project managers, multiple dedicated production people, as I mentioned, a full-time DBA. But from just being able to manage the case comprehensively, at the onset, we kind of give you that definition of power project management. It's that really being responsive, really being agile, making sure you're available. So obviously you can't be awake 24/7, but if you build a really comprehensive team that it can be very powerful. I know that, not used on my case, but at D4 Special Counsel, we absolutely have a project manager. She's based in Honolulu, Hawaii, and that gives our New York clients some ability to have more kind of around-the-clock coverage for things that might pop up well outside of a New York project manager's hours. And Mike, you can probably add some color to this. Mike is like a machine when it comes to the managed review. So what is too much, I guess, is the question.
Well, for the managed review side of it, you would only have one case. And like most of my large ones, like my largest ones have had as many as 12 project managers that reported to me on them. So I wouldn't have had more than one case at a time on that. And it's just for the same reason, just being almost, I had review teams in London and LA, so it was almost like things were going on 24/7 at times.
And did the project manager press the buttons, or are they strictly you're reporting to your clients and you're kind of the point of contact? Like if a new request comes in, you said you had multiple case teams. Like do you actually do work, or are you just more the overseer? And
So on the large ones, I do less actual QCing, less actual pushing buttons than I do on smaller cases, and it's only because it's part of the job is also on teams that large. It's just kind of herding cats as well, just pointing the army in the direction of the next tranche of documents. So I do less, but I still do. I don't feel comfortable answering questions or even going to the client unless I'm familiar with the documents. But so I still do get into the database and poke around in QC, especially the hot docs.
one more question. And so if they have a change request, are you the point of contact? So they come to you and you filter the information down to your workers, or do they go directly to the workers and it get filtered up to you that they had I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
the best
it
way to
usually goes
manage.
through me, so that they will, let's say they say, okay, we're changing something with the protocol. That's usually a conversation with me and the case team, and then it goes to that documentation thing as well. So I say, okay, this is what I heard, and this is what this means. Does everyone agree? And then when everyone agrees, I send that to the case team, and so yeah, it's pretty much I'm a point of contact between the case team and the reviewers.
Another thing that can be done if it's not done, and probably should be done, is that for the very large enterprise clients, we definitely have basically a nightly update that goes out every day. Everything that's being done on the case, all the requests that are completed, ongoing, things that are problematic, things where we need answers from the legal team, from the litigation support professionals. It's all in this digest that goes out nightly, not on Saturday and Sunday, at least not for my giant case, but that digest is a pretty powerful thing because you often have, people that are more intimately involved, but then you might have partners who have never logged into the Relativity workspace or any of the workspaces for a particular enterprise, yet they want to know at a high level what's going on. We also have situations for our corporate clients where there's often an attorney from one of the law firms representing it that's actually sitting on site at the corporate client. It's almost like that's a person that's become part of the legal team of that corporation, but they're not. They actually work for law firm XYZ, and that person is obviously making a lot of decisions and giving you a lot of feedback, but he or she having that nightly update and that information is pretty critical as well. So again, that documentation of everything that we were talking about, that SharePoint portal to really store a lot of information historically about your case, that can really become invaluable, especially as you get further down the road. Mine's been going for more than 4 years. So more than 4 years I've been doing, effectively the same case. That's a really long time. And I can't remember what happened last week, let alone what happened, 3.5 years ago. So you definitely need to document, and as Mike said, dedicate a considerable amount of time to that documentation piece. So, other questions? I know that there's some burning questions out there on Power Project Management. Well, if not, we certainly thank you for your time. Our contact information is up here. They put in this slide. Please do the surveys. We would certainly appreciate that. That not only helps us as presenters, but it certainly helps Relativity know what you obtained from these sessions and how you felt about it. And we can't thank you enough for your time. Enjoy the rest of your fest and certainly enjoy lunch as well. So thank you.